Love on the Rocks is the 19th episode of the 7th season of Full House. This is directed by Tom Rickard, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And on the one hand, it's a really moving and very well executed episode, and on the other, it's kind of uncomfortable, but everything works out all right. It starts off very sweetly with Michelle teaching Nicky and Alex to play Simon Says. It's a really cute way to start things off. We then have two parts to the narrative, and I'll talk about each of them in turn. I'll talk about Joey's prank first, and then I'll talk about DJ and Steve. Joey pulls what I have to say is a very clever prank. It probably wouldn't work as well today with technology and the fact that nobody's getting hold of my phone. But he sets all of the clocks in the house several hours ahead. So people wake up thinking it's 8 a.m. and it's actually 5 a.m. And everybody's really tired. But as I think Danny pointed out, once they found out, they have the joy of knowing they can go back to bed for a few hours, which is a great feeling. So in a way, it was a prank, but also everybody got that happy feeling of being told they can go to sleep for a few more hours. And Joey did this because they always work out his pranks for April Fool's Day. So he played the prank ahead of April Fool's Day, but they're going to get him back. And the prank they choose, I hate. They decide to fake a lottery ticket. They're going to record the lottery and then get a ticket with those winning numbers, but then show Joey the taping the following week. So he has basically the right numbers for the wrong week. And he watches it. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I don't think that's a prank. I think that's cruel because Joey thinks he's won millions of dollars. Technically. I'll talk about that in a moment. But I will say I was looking at the goofs on IMDb, and there are sometimes some interesting tidbits there. And somebody had pointed out that it doesn't make sense because the lottery would have drawn the same numbers 2 weeks in a row, which, yes, is true. They used the taping from last week to then show the numbers for this week. But I don't think it matters. I can't name the lottery numbers from last week. I play the lottery every week. I've played the same numbers for many, many years. And I have no idea what numbers won last week. So chances are, if Joey's looking at the numbers for this week, even though they're from last week, he's not going to make the connection. So while technically it doesn't make sense because it's the same numbers 2 weeks in a row, I don't think anybody would notice that at all. Thankfully, it wasn't a big deal because as much as I hate the prank, Joey was aware of it. And he turned things around on them. They threw his ticket into the fire, which is so cruel. And he played along. And he told them, no, there was no tape in the VCR. Those were the live lottery numbers. And everybody panics. And I guess maybe that's where they think the goof came in because people would then go, but hang on, those were the same numbers then 2 weeks in a row. But at the same time, I don't think in that panicked state where Joey had basically just said, you've just thrown millions of dollars ticket into the fire, I don't think they'd really be thinking about that. So again, I understand why technically it doesn't make sense, but I don't really think that's a big deal. I don't think in that moment they would be thinking of that because that's rational thinking, and I don't think that would come into play. And then it turns out that, well, he reveals that he was aware that this was happening and everything was a prank. And then they drench him. So everything balances out. And while I hated the lottery prank, I've said that 3 times, I kept saying lottery plank. While I hated the prank, I did think everything worked out all right in the end. I'm glad that Joey knew. But please don't ever do that to anybody, really, because that's really cruel. We then come to the main narrative, which is so wonderfully executed. Kimmy is dating somebody she calls Keanu. He's played by Brian Evans, and she remarks that Steve and DJ's relationship's boring compared to theirs. And DJ has some concern about this. Steve goes off to LA for this film class trip, and he meets Suzanne Somers, and it's so funny seeing them panicking. DJ panics because she wants to spend time with Steve because she's off school, but Steve's going away. He's going to LA. You live in San Francisco. It's not as if he's traveling to a different country. It just made me laugh at how serious she seemed to make it. But when Steve's away, he phones her, and DJ begins to realise that maybe her life revolves a bit too much around Steve. So she agrees to go climbing with Kimmy and Keanu, and we have this great moment where she gets to the top of the rocks, and the set looks great. It looks really good, and she realizes that it was worth the climb. The view was great, and it's kind of like from this new height, she's getting this fresh perspective. And she actually has a great week, even though Steve's away, and she's really busy to the point where she forgot Steve was coming home on this date and he'd been waiting for her. And that's when she points out that her life doesn't revolve around him, which I actually think was a bit of a wake up for her. It sounds obvious, but I feel like they'd been so caught up in their relationship that she was unable to see the bigger picture, which is not unique. I feel like that's a very common experience. And she ends up having a really nice talk with Danny. They're a really lovely moment together. And she takes Steve climbing. And they have what I think is one of the most mature conversations I've ever witnessed, where they both come to the agreement that their relationship is more like that of friends. The romance isn't there. And part of me does think maybe they're brushing aside this relationship because they think relationships should be nothing but non-stop passion. But at the same time, if they don't feel that connection, then maybe they should just be friends. And I'm not afraid to admit that I got a little emotional. I did cry a teeny tiny bit because it was emotional, it was upsetting. I don't want them to break up, but it was also so beautifully executed. It is such a great example of how to handle that maturely. There was no movement. I don't know why I was going to say mooing. There was no screaming, there was no shouting. It was just so well executed. The performances were so mature. And we end with DJ saying to herself that she's going to be okay, which is a really solid message to end on, because nobody wants a breakup, even if they're the one instigating the breakup, even if they know it's the right thing to do. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And I think it was a really powerful way to end it. But it's really emotional, but very, very well done. And there was just something about having it on the rocks, having the conversation out on this new height, this new high, if you like, this new height of DJ's life. It was symbolic, and I liked it. I thought it was a really good decision. It would have been just as emotional if they decided to have the conversation in the kitchen, but I thought it was a nice touch, and I think it worked really, really well. So, all things considered, Love on the Rocks is a pretty great episode of Full House. Certainly, it's one that I really thoroughly enjoyed. Very, very moving. Yes, I don't like the prank with Joey. I don't think the lottery ticket prank is a good idea. I don't think it's a very kind thing to do. In fact, I think it's very, very cruel, particularly if somebody's maybe not financially well off, or basically if somebody isn't already a millionaire, don't do it because it's horrible. But as I said, all's well that ends well because Joey was aware of the prank, and I think that was certainly the right way to take it. Needless to say, it's ultimately a solid episode, and I think they made all of the right decisions with this one. Love on the Rocks is a really strong episode of Full House with a really brilliant final scene.